I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this latest episode installment of Real Talk. Our topic today is going to be about comparison of racism in the U.S. Comparison of racism in Japan and the U.S. or other countries as well. Maybe other places you might have experienced, have lived experiences and whatnot. So today we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to give some prompt questions, and I'd like you guys to feel free and comfortable to answer and discuss and relate your experiences with everyone. So first, we'd like to start off with some introductions, some brief introductions about yourself, where you're from. And let's start with, I'm going to go on my screen. We'll start with Gino.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Gino Gordon. I was born in Sasebo, Japan, but grew up in San Diego, California. Went to Harvard University, and I've been in Japan for 8 years this time. Initially starting off as a professional American football player, and now I'm the country manager of a sports marketing company. So I'm super excited to talk about these type of things. It's definitely, I'm particularly passionate about kind of social interaction and how that affects people. So yeah, I'm really excited, and really excited to hear everybody else's opinions on things as well.
Yeah, thank you, Gino. And next, Rino.
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Rino Yoshida. I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan, and currently I'm in first year of my master's degree. I research about African American history and racism. Yeah, I've been to an international school in Tokyo and surrounded by like multicultural backgrounds. So excited to have a conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, Bessie Snow.
Hi everyone, my name is Bessie Snow. I was born in Sapporo, Japan, but grew up in Los Angeles and going back and forth throughout childhood and adulthood, visiting family in Japan. But yeah, I went to grade school and high school in Southern California, spent my college and years in the Bay Area, San Francisco area, and lived there for about 10 years until I decided to sell all my things and pack my bags and travel full-time on the road with my partner and dogs. So we've been traveling on the road for 6 months. So I've been able to see all parts of America in the skin that I'm in. And I'm also a burlesque performer and an avid investigator of what beauty and desire is in all of its forms in being a mixed race person. And I'm very excited to join in the conversation today as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Like I said, I appreciate you guys being here. And so let's get started with the first question. And that is, have you experienced racism in Japan or outside of Japan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yes, I've experienced it both in Japan and America. And the funny thing about it is all the occasions that I have remembered or I can remember are generally pretty different. And you know, a lot of times my experience, and we can go into details later, but a lot of times my experience in America in terms of racism has been a little bit more upfront. You know, being stopped by police for no apparent reason, and you know, it's just I got told I sat down weird in my car. That was an interesting situation, and or just being followed in stores. So these type of things are generally pretty upfront and kind of out there, where they're just a general assumption that you know, you're probably doing something wrong. So those type of things. And obviously I think at my age it's just known that I've been called slur a few times, so that's kind of been like that. But in Japan, things are quite, you know, a little bit more subtle with things. It's never really outright, hey, you're black, or you're part black, this is this and that. It's just a very subtle way of saying, hey, you don't necessarily belong here. It's something that's been pretty apparent growing up as being Japanese American. You kind of experience this type of stuff as you move forward. But yeah, I would say I've had both, and I would say they're both different flavors of what racism different flavors of what racism could be. So yeah.
I see you nodding your head, Bessie. Sounds like something that resonates with you.
I mean, to answer your question, I think it's yes, absolutely. And I really relate to Gino's experience. I wouldn't say I've experienced a lot of overt racism. I think I have a lot of mixed or racial ambiguity privilege, where people can't place what I look like all the time. But with that said, because I'm a person of color and I am obviously not white, I think that in Japan or here in the States, there's a lot of microaggressions that happen all the time that is meant to other me or to judge me based upon my features and the body that I'm in. So yeah, I think that I really relate to the subtlety of that experience, especially in Japan. But I would say my experience personally is also very subtle here in the States here.
How about you, Rino? Like you went from Japan to the States, so you've also lived in both places. Have you ever experienced any sort of racism?
So in Japan, I never experienced racism, and I never see myself or like identify myself as Asian, the category of race. I just see myself as myself, not as Japanese as well, because I never judged based on that identity. But when I moved to the States, although I just stayed there for like 9 months, it was quite short. But I see myself that I am part of the Asian category, and yeah, everyone tried to see myself as Asian first. Mainly they judge me based on like, oh, are you from China or maybe Korea? But not like as a Japanese person or like myself. It always my identity will like be based on the race category always. And that was really an uncomfortable experience compared to living in a majority group in Japan, because yeah, I was rarely judged by nationality, race, or like my appearance. So yeah, it was an uncomfortable experience. But I also know that in Japan there's a racism, but it's not like, as Gino and Bessie mentioned, it's not like overt racism. It's like more subtle and a lot of microaggressions. And yeah, it's kind of hard for us to have a conversation over racism because it's kind of sensitive, and most of us is majority, so we don't want to be a perpetrator or like, it's so uncomfortable because we are not a victim. Compared to like the States, it's really an uncomfortable conversation to talk about race in Japan, in my opinion.
I had one question actually about your experience in Atlanta. Did the obviously you were categorized by your race a lot. Did you get different reactions based on the race of the individual? Like, for example, if a Black person had a conversation with you, like did that, when they talked about race, was that different as opposed to like a white person? I say that I ask this because one thing, the general image is like, oh, I received racism from non-Black people in America, but I've also kind of received the opposite end, where on like my African American counterparts are actually not particularly nice about things they were saying about my Japanese heritage as well. So I was just wondering, was there any type of like change in like messaging or how the reaction was based on the race of the individual?
Maybe I've got like a racial prejudice, with like not by Asian people, but it was from white or Black or other races. But yeah, it was not all by white persons, but it was also Black person as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm also particularly interested in intersectionality, how kind of it's not just race, it's also, I don't want to go into too much detail, but like your sex and stuff like that, like how does that affect people's interactions? So that's a different type of rabbit hole we want to go down, but obviously I was just curious if that was something that, you know, affected you or no at all.
Right, and it's a good question, because, you know, as Rino brought up, coming from a majority culture, there's going to be kind of a rude awakening to some degree, like, wow, this is what's happening. So would any of you like to share any sort of moments that might have happened or experiences of racism that you might have had? Anything that you can think of off the top of your head?
So before I moved to my current apartment, I was living between Ebisu and Meguro, and I would get stopped by the police probably once every month or so for a while, especially because I would walk home late from work, because my work was in Ebisu and I'd walk to essentially Meguro. So I would get stopped and I'd be given different reasons almost every time. So there are quite a few, I can probably name a few of them. One was I came out of the dark. That was one. I was wearing black. That was another one. They said people overstay their visas, so they need to check me and do, you know, like when you get stopped in Japan, you get the whole pat down. They check every single pocket. I can, you know, it's essentially the equivalent to like a stop and frisk, but just very politely. So those are a few of the reasons. Another one was they thought I stole my own bike, so they had to check. So those type of things. So that happened all within 6 months or so, and I would get stopped pretty regularly. And then eventually, for a different reason, I ended up moving to kind of closer to the Ebisu Shibuya side, and that doesn't really happen. But for some reason in that area, I was getting stopped almost regularly. And you know, that's actually, I thought that was pretty interesting. But you know, that was kind of my experience with racism, and particularly, I mean, now, because a lot of it was just like, we see a foreigner walking down the street or riding his bike down the street and we're going to stop him, and not necessarily, I didn't do anything wrong, you know? So I would say that's, there was also just an assumption that I had a visa, which I don't, because I have Japanese citizenship. So after they found out that I had Japanese citizenship, the conversation oftentimes ended. So that was also something that happened as well.
You said after they found out you had the visa, the conversation, what happened?
Well, that I don't have a visa, because they would ask me, where's your like Z card? But
Right.
I don't have one. I don't need one. Right. So, but once they found out that I'm technically, like, my kokuseki is Japanese, then the conversation pretty much, it's awkward, because they're like, oh, like, can we still check you? And I'm like, yeah, go ahead and still check me. So the tone changes once they realize that you have Japanese nationality for some reason. So, and that's why I know, because the conversations are always done in Japanese. It's obviously I can speak Japanese, so it's never a situation where it's like it was misunderstood. It was just a normal conversation. And then it's not like I don't bring my passport around. So they're like, why don't you have your Z card? I'm like, because I don't need it. I don't have one. So, and that happened. That happened for a while, pretty regularly, almost like clockwork. So that was one particular, or a few particular situations where that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of, just compassion for, I mean, Gino mentioned intersectionalities a moment ago, and, in this particular dynamic of the group, Gino here is a Black man, and when I think of who has, I mean, when I think the most vulnerable person in the world is the Black trans woman, but then next to that is the Black man, and he's kind of central in that dialogue and everything, it's the root of a lot of the conversations that we have when we talk about like Black Lives Matter. And as a woman, as a queer woman, but as a woman who I feel like I'm more of a witness to a lot of things. And at first, for the longest time, I thought, because I was only a witness, it didn't impact me. But a lot of my explorations have been to understand how like witnessing is just as traumatizing. Witnessing my father or my brothers, experience things that I may not, because I'm a woman and I can kind of not get stopped by the police in some ways, or have just like a different experience because of other privileges that I have and how I look. And so I don't know, I'm just like nodding my head and feeling all of what Gino is saying, and understanding that like I feel like there's such a spectrum to the experience of racism, and mine isn't any less valid, but it's like really minute compared to a lot of things. And but it's all like related and it's all important, and it all kind of builds on top of each other, the ignorant question or the wanting to touch your hair. For me, I had much curlier hair when I was younger. And so when I was in Japan, that was always just a curious, to be looked at like you're a spectacle, or, or some kind of, foreigner. And then, it's just, it's an odd experience to always kind of be under a spotlight. But Gino, so all those experiences were in Japan. Did you have similar ones in America with the police as well?
So I made a pretty big effort to stay away from the police in America. Mainly because just I think the biggest thing is my father and we would talk pretty regularly about this, and I think this is a very poignant thing. Is like my dad told me, he's like, I understand you identify as being mixed, but he told me this young, probably when I was, I would say maybe 7, 8 years old, like a time where I was more worried about playing sports than anything else. He was like, no matter how you see yourself, people are always going to see you as Black. And as a Black male, like, you're going to be treated as this. So I was given that talk at an extremely young age, where, that type of innocence that you see in kids, like, and he didn't do it. It wasn't a thing. He wasn't trying to, there was no malice behind it. He was like, you need to be prepared for this type of stuff. So, he's like, police, you don't know what type of policeman you're gonna. They could be a nice one, there could be not nice one. So in the end of the day, like, hey, don't do anything wrong. Don't seem like you're doing anything wrong. Don't wear your clothes in a certain way. If you do anything, it's yes or no. So it's very basic things that people think it's like inconspicuous, or you're like, you should do that. But the fact that my dad told me this at 7, 8 years old, saying it because like the police, not all of them are good, and like you have to be able to like essentially protect yourself. So I was able to continually kind of stay away from those type of situations. The only time where I got stopped and it was a little awkward or pretty disconcerting was that I got in my car, I was ready to leave, and the cops came right behind me as I was trying to pull out, and they just thought I was drinking and driving. It was a little bit later at night, and then I had to talk to them for about 10 minutes, and they were just like, yeah, you sat down like you were drunk. And I was like, what? I don't know what that looks like. So and they ended up letting me go, but it wasn't a regular thing. And to be quite frank, when I was younger, my schedule was pretty packed with sports and school related stuff. So there wasn't a lot of time to get into, any type of trouble and stuff like that. So I think my parents did that for a reason. So I think the racism that I saw a lot of was, there was that. And then again, maybe going into the microaggressions. I mean, outside of the slurs that you hear, kind of, even when I played football, you heard that a lot. Just like things like you talk well, like that, which is kind of an underhanded compliment, because it starts off with the assumption that people who look like you don't speak well, and like you're different because that, so those I would put in the category of a microaggression. So just to answer your question, that's things that I've been around. So it's more of, it was a lot of it. The upfront stuff obviously was there, but as I got older, playing sports, playing sports was kind of my ticket to get accepted in these type of things. All these kind of underhanded compliments and weird, these type of things became more and more apparent and more prevalent. So yeah, to answer your question, that's kind of what it was like. Yeah.
And just to put things into perspective, not all of the racism comes from the police. I think that needs to be noted, that there's a lot of interpersonal and then systematic. And then, like when you're saying, like, people say, oh, well, you speak well, because the assumption is that, well, you're Black, so you don't speak well. From your perspective, what you've seen and experienced, what's the most common form of racism in Japan?
I feel like, I don't know, the thing that comes up for me is just like white aspiration. I feel like there's white aspiration in Japan,